these robots seemed to acquire, but there it was. If the ship's intelligence were to be allowed emotions, and certainly no one could doubt that Titania had strong emotions, then you had to allow her to choose robot characters she got on with. It was no good forcing the issue, although Leovinus had on occasions spoken to Titania quite forcibly about some of the characters with whom she surrounded herself. But then Titania was so tolerant, so understanding of people's failings and mistakes, that she could get on with practically anybody. He had made her like that. The giant promenade deck was Leovinus's particular little favourite. Under its vast, transparent canopy, passengers could stroll and marvel at the mind-erupting brilliance of the galaxy through which they were passing. The vari-specs composition glass of which the canopy was made had the effect of intensifying the radiant brightness of the stars, while at the same time making it possible for the observer, by a mere twist of the head, to see in the detail of a powerful telescope any particular star that caught his, her or its fancy. Around the perimeter, the pellator, a sort of horizontal lift of Leovinus's design, enabled the less active travellers to tour the deck without stirring an unnecessary muscle. That was the theory. That was what Leovinus had viewed with great complacency on his telepresence and in his virtual reality viewer at home. But that was not what he now saw in front of him. Real reality was different. What he now saw was what is referred to architecturally as
from Simon & Schuster Audio, Douglas Adams' Starship Titanic by Terry Jones and Douglas Adams. Read by Terry Jones.
"Where is Leovinus?" demanded the gas of Blerontis, chief quantity surveyor of the entire northeastern gas district of the planet of Blerontin. "No, I do not want another bloody fish paste sandwich." He did not exactly use the word bloody, because it did not exist in the Blerontin language. The word he used could be more literally translated as similar in size to the left earlobe, but the meaning was much closer than bloody. Nor did he actually use the phrase fish paste, since fish do not exist on Blerontin in the form in which we would understand them to be fish. But when one is translating from a language used by a civilization of which we know nothing, located as far away as the centre of the galaxy, one has to be approximate. Similarly, the GAT of Blerontis was not exactly a quantity surveyor, and certainly the term Northeastern Gas District gives no idea at all about the magnificence and grandeur of his position. Look, perhaps I better start again. We don't. Where the new starship stood, veiled in its attractive pink silk sheeting. Not one member of the crowd had glimpsed even so much as a nut or a bolt of the ship, but already its fame had swept the galaxy from spiral arm to spiral arm. Back on the launch podium, the great Leovinus had still not been sighted. A minor official was explaining yet again to the GAT of Blerontis why the fish paste sandwiches were essential. "Normally, your stupendous and most lofty magnificence, you would be quite right in supposing that the mere launch of a starship would not be marked by such distinguished observances. But as you are aware, this starship is different. This starship is the greatest, most gorgeous, most technologically advanced starship ever built. This is the ultimate starship, the greatest cybernautic achievement of this or any other age, and it is utterly indestructible. The Intergalactic Council therefore thought it suitable to declare it a fish paste sandwich event." The Blerontins insist on serving so-called fish paste sandwiches during festivals and important book launches, despite the fact that all Blerontins find them disgusting. It is a tradition that dates back to a time when Blerontin was an impoverished planet, living on the edge of starvation. Having run out of every other kind of food, the Blerontin team were reluctantly forced to offer up fish paste sandwiches as their entry for the Centennial Intergalactic Canapé Championship. For some unaccountable reason, the fish paste appealed to the jaded palates of the judges, clinched the championship for Bloemfontein, and paved the way for Bloemfontinian domination of the entire galactic centre for eons to come. The Gat's heart sank. His last line of defence shrivelled before his eyes, and he knew he was condemned to eat at least one fish paste canopy before the launch was over. The taste, he knew, would endure for months, and a Bloemfontein month was equivalent to several lifetimes if you happened to come from Earth, which of course nobody there did. In fact, nobody in that entire throng of some 50 million Bloemfontinians who had turned up to see the launch of the greatest starship in the history of the universe had ever even heard of Earth. And if you'd asked them, they wouldn't have been able to understand you, because translation blisters were not allowed to be worn on a fish paste event. It was another of those stupid little traditions that made the Gat furious. And still, Leovinus did not appear. "Everyone here is holding their breath and keeping their fingers crossed," whispered the head reporter of the Bloemfontein News Gathering Bureau into his invisible microphone. "No one has yet even caught so much as a glimpse of the fabulous starship, but everyone is certain that it will not only be the most technologically advanced, but also the most beautiful starship ever to have been created. It is, after all, the brainchild of Leovinus, to whose architectural genius we owe the great North-South Bridge that now links our two polar caps, to whose musical inspiration we owe the Bloemfontein National Anthem, Our Canapés Triumph Daily, and to whose unsurpassable mastery of ballistics and biomass energetics we owe our third sun that now shines above us with its own famous on-off switch. But there's news just coming in that... What's that? Ladies and gentlemen of things, it appears that the great Leovinus has gone missing. Nobody has seen him all day. Surely we can't start the launch without him, but the crowd are beginning to demand some action and... what's that?" A sour note had swept through the crowd as a band of short individuals, dressed in ragged overalls and flat caps, suddenly forced their way into the spectators' area. They were shouting in a language no one could understand, because of the ban on translator blisters, and they were brandishing indecipherable placards. "It looks as if the Yaskin delegation has managed to gain entry." An ache of alarm had entered the head reporter's voice. This was mainly because he had his entire commentary written down in advance, as he always did. The thought that an unforeseen turn of events might now force him to look at what was actually going on, and then improvise, was a nightmare that had dogged his sleep for all the years that he had been in the reporting business. Said the head reporter. He felt his head going light. He fought for breath as he felt his bowels starting to move. No, what can I say? He was praying that the words would come to him. In his recurring nightmare, the one that he always had after eating smoked chitlings, he was in this very situation. Something unforeseen had occurred. His script was whisked away by some unseen hand, and the words never came. It has to be explained, in defence of the head reporter, that unforeseen events seldom occurred during public events on Bloemfontein, owing to the fact that the authorities exerted a pretty tight control over these things. "It's coming just out, woo!" exclaimed the head reporter. At that moment, an unseen hand whisked away his script, and the head reporter felt a warm sensation all over his lower abdomen. "I've done it! I mean, it's definitely Yaskins! I can see them now!" That was practically 2 whole sentences. He could do it! "These purply pitch burps! Oh, damn!" It was one thing not to be able to think of anything, but how could he possibly come out with utter nonsense? That hadn't been in his nightmare. It was worse. The truth is that this personal disaster for the head reporter was just one in a string of disasters that had dogged the building of the starship. There had been rumours of Corner's Cup. The Cybernet pigeon curses had been below spec. The great engine had been mislaid. Leovinus himself had quarrelled with the chairman of Starstruck Inc. There had been arguments between Leovinus and his manager, Probostigan. There had been quarrels between Probostigan and Leovinus's accountant, Scraliontis. There had been arguments between Scraliontis and Leovinus, and so on and so on. The fact of the matter was that the construction of the starship had brought financial ruin on almost everybody involved, including one entire planet. Yaska had been, hitherto, a flourishing resort of industrious folk, with the most efficient and dependable construction industry in the central galaxy. Yaskans had enjoyed centuries of quiet prosperity and a high reputation. They never overcharged, they always delivered on time, They never cut corners. They were a race of proud craftsmen who had nothing to do with intergalactic canapés competitions, and thus were able to devote their wealth to the well-being of their own people. That was until they undertook the construction of Leovinus's masterpiece, crowning achievement of his career, the starship that even now stands hidden from sight in its launching bay, awaiting the unveiling ceremony. "Give us back our happy lifestyle!" shout the Yaskian demonstrators unintelligibly to the Bloontian onlookers. "Planets, not starships!" roar their placards to the baffled crowd. "Get those bastards out of there!" growls Fortin Vivanquez, the chief of police and rabbits. "Where is Leovinus?" groans the Gat of Bloontis. Could it be only the day before that Leovinus had held his press conference? He had felt so powerfully complacent as he stepped up onto the platform. His white beard had been specially groomed by Feronis Feronisis, the greatest hairdresser on Bloontin, and his eyebrows had been stuck back on with a new toupee tape that was guaranteed absolutely undetectable. In many ways, this was the greatest moment in his life. "What is it like to be not only the greatest architect the galaxy has ever known, but also the greatest sculptor, the greatest mathematical genius, as well as a world-class garnisher and canapés arranger?" Exactly the kind of question Leovinus enjoyed. There had been times in his younger days when he might have retorted, "Go lick someone else's arse, hack, I'm only interested in truth and beauty." But somehow he found that the more wrinkles he counted on his forehead, and the more problems he had with his continence and his 7 times table, the more he found a little flattery most welcome. "I love your Pandax building with the interchangeable rooms and total reassembly potential," shouted a young cub reporter with soft eyes and a delightful cleavage. "No, thank you." Leovinus beamed in his most venerable and yet at the same time approachable manner. "You look terrific," shouted another. Leovinus was just trying to decide which of the 2 cub reporters with soft eyes and delightful cleavages he should ask backstage for a little drink, or whether he should invite them both and then see how things worked out, when a male voice cut across. Exactly what was the scientific experiment you were working on when you had your recent accident, sir? And is it true that your eyebrows have still not grown back?" Leovinus fought off a panic attack and told himself his eyebrows looked perfectly okay. This hard-boiled journalist was merely trying to wind him up. Then he had to fight off a panic attack about the fact that he just had a panic attack.